when you talk about bumping a player, it's pretty much...
Great courage. One that says the bump is dead, that's how you deliver it.
What is going on, YouTube universe? My name is Trent and welcome to the Hip and Shoulder, where we discuss everything Australian rules football. And today we are diving back in with another edition of the Round Recap podcast, which, for those of you who may not be familiar with the Round Recap podcast, is a reflection of the weekend of AFL action that just went down. When I do decide to do the podcast, of course, because we have been a little bit tardy the last couple of weeks. But today we're diving into round 16, which presented us a very unique round of football in many retrospects, because while some teams performed as well as we probably expected them to perform, we were given some games that really set the scene alight, especially as a neutral supporter, through my eyes anyway. I found myself incredibly invested this weekend in many games of football. And normally on a weekend, and every weekend, I like to sit back and kind of take every game of football in. As much as I love watching the game, I don't find myself really emotionally invested in too many games outside of watching my team play, and I go for Richmond, tragically and unfortunately. But this particular weekend really had me on the edge of my seat in so many retrospects, and I found myself cheering for teams that I didn't think I'd find myself cheering for, and that, I think, speaks volumes to the state of the game in certain aspects. I still feel the game as a whole has a lot of holes that they're trying to maybe find band-aid fixes for, and they're trying to patch over, and I think with time, under the proper direction, that will change. But there are still some glaring issues overall with the competition that I think need to be addressed. Obviously, the state of the umpiring this year, I personally believe, has been the worst we have seen in many years. However, CEO Andrew Dillon decides to come out this week and turn around and said that the umpiring of the game is as good as it's ever been. And I'll make sure that I quote him correctly, because I misquoted him by saying it's the best it's ever been instead of it's as good as it's ever been. And I got dragged on Twitter for it. I don't even fucking know what the difference is. It's the exact same sentiment. But for the CEO of the AFL, the head honcho, to come out and turn around and say that there's nothing wrong with the umpiring and it's as good as it's ever been is a load of fucking shit. I mean, does he watch football at all, at any level, on any given weekend? Because every single weekend and every single game of football this year has presented ourselves with a discussion point about how terrible the umpiring has been. And this particular weekend, we did see, yet again, lo and behold, some terrible umpiring decisions, and the quality of umpiring dipping in certain games, and some teams getting a better rub than other teams, and, you know, the common kind of bullshit that we are used to kind of taking in, at least to some certain retrospect when it came to the failure of the AFL and the umpiring, like reports and you know, the MRO and that kind of stuff. We kind of got some better outcomes this particular weekend, and, you know, people that were reported and sent to the MRO getting off for things that they should have never been cited for in the first place. So at least to some retrograde, common sense prevailed this week. But it still really irks me that we're in a state of the game that is so heavily over umpired, and in some retrospects for some teams under umpired, and yet the head honcho can come out and turn around and say there's nothing wrong with the state of umpiring. That therein lies the problem. Accepting that there is no problem means that there's never going to be directive to change, and change needs to fucking happen. With that being said, it's time to turn our attention to the games at hand, and round 16 opened up on Friday night at the Gabba, with Brisbane hosting Melbourne in a game where both teams are still well and truly in the hunt for the top 8, and there was a lot to gain and a lot to lose from this contest. As was for many of the games over this particular weekend, and there is still a few spots in the top 8 that are going to shift between probably 5th place right down until about 12th place, maybe even 13th. It's ridiculous to think at this point in time we have so many teams still well and truly in contention for a final spot. And these two teams here have had, rockabout kind of seesaw seasons, so there was a lot on the line for this particular game. The Gabba is normally a fortress for Brisbane, and we've come to accept that over recent years. However, the start of the season for Brisbane this year saw them fumble the ball at the Gabba and kind of really made neutral supporters and even Brisbane supporters kind of question whether that fortress was now penetrable. Melbourne, on the other hand, have been picking up wins here and there, but where their shortcomings have kind of become more glaring is their makeshift forward line that they're trying to piece together that hasn't really clicked. Harrison Petty, in my eyes, is not a key forward. He should be playing as a defender. We have the likes of Bailey Fritsch, who in last week's podcast, I mentioned a lot of people were touting as a All-Australian selection earlier on in the year, and he's been hardly cited over recent weeks. They've got Keziah Pickett, who is now rotating through the midfield, but he gets himself in so much trouble that every season we're used to probably seeing him rubbed out for a handful of matches, so we can't rely on him being available every week. And, Ben Brown can't break into this team even when he's fit. Tom McDonald, we're used to seeing him as a forward, but he's been played as a defender. So it's been very tumultuous for Melbourne in the essence of not having a solid grounding forward half of the ball, whereas Brisbane, even though they started the year off a little bit tail-ended, have become one of the best, if not the best, defense to forward ball movement teams. They've got arguably the best forward structure in the competition, and it shows, especially in games like this particular game here, which came down to the final moments of the game. Less than 4 minutes to go, Kai Lohmann goes back and slots a beautiful goal to bring Brisbane back within a point. Will Ashcroft, first game back in for a very long time, misses a shot on goal, but brings it back to a tied game. And at that point in time, I'm wondering, are we going to see another draw for the 2024 season? And then one of the biggest discussion points out of this weekend becomes visually apparent on screen. We have a moment deep in the Brisbane forward line where Alex Neil-Bullen from Melbourne takes possession of the ball, manages to shrug a tackle. Hugh McCluggage is coming towards him, and he must have had NRL on the brain, given the fact that down at the MCG earlier that week, we saw the State of Origin play out from, the New South Wales and the Queensland teams going head-to-head for Game 2. He grabs the ball and dives over the boundary line as if he's trying to score a try. And the umpire goes and pays a free kick for deliberate and sets McCluggage up for one of the most clutch moments we will see, I think, all season this year. A lot of people are arguing that that wasn't a deliberate out of bounds. I actually had a discussion with Caden McDonald on Twitter about it. Caden, obviously being a huge Melbourne Demons fan, he believed it should have been a throw-in at that point in time, and that there was enough nuance to not pay that free kick. However, if you've shaken one tackle and then you take the deliberate approach of making sure that ball goes out of bounds, I think you take away that limitation and you justify the fact that there was ample time after struggling a tackle. I just meant shrug and struggle in the same sentence. That's fucking fantastic, isn't it? Fact of the matter is, he shrugged off a tackle, he dove for the line, it was paid deliberate out of bounds. I think it was justified. And ice in his veins, Hugh McCluggage goes back with the drop punt, mind you, puts it through the middle to put Brisbane a goal up with only moments left on the clock. Melbourne, backs against the wall, come out firing. They manage to take the ball all the way to their forward 50. Bailey Fritsch, on a game where yet again he fails to deliver, kicks his third behind for the night, making it a 5-point game, and Brisbane was smart enough to just hold up the clock for the rest of the game and run out this game the victors. Given the disparity of this match at halftime and the dominance that Melbourne kind of rolled on with through three-quarter time as well, this is a huge outcome for Brisbane. And I don't know whether we can kind of point out the fact here that Melbourne have kind of struggled to finish games off since Christian Petrarca has been out. Whether he is the key to their success, I don't know. But Brisbane, again, showing that you don't have to be a fast starting team in order to kind of gain momentum back, because they have allowed teams plenty of times this year to kind of get an upper hand early in the game and still find a way to get the job done. Like, they did lead by 14 points at quarter time, don't get me wrong, but then that slipped to a 20 plus point lead for Melbourne by halftime. Then at three-quarter time, they were 15 points up. So it was a good arm wrestle for most of the game, but to see this game play out the way it did, just to have that clutch moment at the end, still have enough time with game on the line for Melbourne to get that clutch win, it was interesting, especially given that there was a shot on goal. It might have been Tom Sparrow, it could have been Trent Rivers, I'm not sure which player it was, but took a mark at half forward, got kind of bumped in the heat of the moment and could have probably been paid a 50-metre penalty. The umpires put the whistle away. So again, contentious kind of decision there. Again, though, you got to point at Melbourne's forward line and question what the fuck is going on, because this is a game where they kick 11 goals. 5 of those goals come off of Keziah Pickett's own boot. He was absolutely on fire for Melbourne. Comparatively, Keziah Pickett kicked as many goals on the day than Joe Danaher, Eric Hipwood, and Charlie Cameron kicked combined. They kicked 5 between them. Keziah Pickett comes out and kicks 5 off his own boot. Absolutely huge. But you have a look at the rest of the Melbourne forward line and you start to question how much longer Simon Goodwin is going to have to try to patch this forward line together until something clicks. Jacob van Rooyen, he kicks 2 goals and he's good for it every week. He's good for a goal or 2, so we give him a pass mark. Daniel Turner kicks himself a goal, only has the 10 possessions. He runs at a good disposal efficiency, though. It depends on the role that you're playing. He manages to hit the scoreboard. He's still kind of invested. Bailey Fritsch, though, again, has 11 disposals at only 60%. He only kicks 1 goal 3 for the game and really doesn't have much input or say. He could, if, it'd be a different talking point if he had kicked 2 or 3. But the fact that they decided this week to stick with him instead of bringing somebody else in, and he only returns 1 goal 3 for the game, somebody who has been spoken about in all Australian circles for a very long time, you need to get better out of him. And then obviously you've got your Harrison Petties, who does absolutely fuck all, as we've come to expect. He kicked 4 behinds on the day from 15 disposals. So he managed to get his hands on the ball around the ground, but 4 behinds, you gotta start. Something's got to give. Something has really got to give when it comes to the forward structure of this team, because they're struggling in front of the sticks. If they're not getting their hands on it and presenting themselves with opportunity to kick goals, they're spraying the opportunities that they do get. This week, when it came to trying to decipher who I felt was best on ground, it was a little bit harder to pick out the Brisbane players than it was the Melbourne players, given how particularly close this game ended up being. When you look at the scoreline, especially, they kicked 35 behinds between the two of them. This game could have really fallen either way if at all these players decided to be accurate with moving that ball forward. Harrison Petty kicks 4 behinds. If he kicks 2 or 3, we're finally talking about him in a positive light. It's just upsetting and so frustrating as a neutral to see these players get afforded opportunities every week. And I can only imagine how Melbourne supporters would feel about seeing a Harrison Petty or a Bailey Fritsch spraying these opportunities when it comes down to a 1-kick game. So ultimately, looking at the players that perform the best for both teams, it's not hard to kind of work out that for Melbourne, it's going to be your usual suspects sticking out, because you've got so many players that continue to underdeliver. The one player that I was actually quite shocked with not having as big of an input in this game at all than and we've all come to really expect, was Max Gawn. I was rather shocked to see the lack of any kind of impact at all. He had 9 disposals for the game. Of those 9 disposals, he ran at 55% disposal efficiency. He had 41 hitouts, don't get me wrong, but Oscar McInerney had 32 hitouts in comparison. Max Gawn has been known for many years as a player who can stand tall, deep intercept for that defensive kind of pressure, go forward of the ball and be used as a forward target. He took 2 marks for the entire game, did not hit the scoreboard at all. I feel they really fumbled by getting rid of Brodie Grundy, in the essence of Max Gawn could have been used as such a figurehead in that forward line, even as a resting forward, knowing that we know he can slam a goal home from outside 50. He's got a great set of hands, and for a big man, he's incredibly mobile as well. So I feel Melbourne have kind of pigeonholed themselves into this particular situation. But to see somebody who will probably be All-Australian ruckman this year struggle to have any impact on the game kind of speaks volumes. He only had 103 meters gained, so that's a lot of like forward, like sideways handballs and very short kind of marginable kicks. Outside of that, there wasn't really many players for Melbourne that really stood out of the players that are going to miss votes. And I only gave votes to one Brisbane player this week as well. I had to point out the efforts of 2 Melbourne players, but outside of that, they had maybe Clayton Oliver having a somewhat decent game. 29 disposals at only 62% efficiency though. 12 contested, 5 clearances, 3 marks, 7 score involvements, and laid 6 tackles on the game. Outside of that, maybe Trent Rivers, who has really had a good couple of months. But there wasn't really much else. I mean, Stephen May and Jake Lever, we've come to know as, figureheads of that backline, 2 of the best defenders in the game, kind of let the game slip out of their hands when the moments counted. And on the flip side, Brisbane just had so many players that you could speak about that I feel maybe, I wouldn't say didn't have any impact, but probably less impactful than the 3 I've decided to roll with for the MVP votes this week. But they still had so many players. Out of the top 10 rated players on the field for the day, they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the top 10 players were all Brisbane. Of those players that missed out on votes this particular week, Lachie Neale had 29 disposals at 75% efficiency with 6 marks, 9 clearances. As far as his score involvements and assists go, he had 7 score involvements but did not lay a tackle. That's actually very odd for Lachie Neale, especially as an inside mid. Dane Zorko had 28 disposals at 78% efficiency, took 9 marks, 6 score involvements, 4 tackles. Hugh McCluggage, Mr. Ice in the veins, maybe could have given him the 1 vote this week for that match-winning goal, but had 28 disposals but only ran at 53% and probably dropped him out for me. Had the 3 clearances, 4 marks, the 1 goal, 7 score involvements, 2 tackles. Jared Berry had a good game. Brandon Starchevich had a good game. Leicester was solid in defence. It shows how far in between these 2 teams truly are. You've got one team who you can rattle off so many names about, and then Melbourne, unfortunately, not many people to speak about when it comes to best ons. But the votes that I gave this week, and for those who are unfamiliar with how this system works, is a Brownlow vote system. 3, 2, 1. Best on ground gets 3, and then 2, and then 1 retrospectively. This is not at all a reflection of anything but my own opinion when it comes to the game. So there are players that I've started to identify this year have probably not gotten the attention they deserve from myself, and I've kind of only got myself to blame, but it gives discussion point for us to have in the comments down below. So if you agree or disagree with who I'm giving the votes to, let's sound off in the comments. Let's talk about it. But the one vote this week, it was hard to go past the efforts of Cozzy Pickett. As I said, he kicked the 5 goals on the day. He had 12 disposals at 75%. He had 1 clearance, took 4 marks, 5 goals too. Could have very well, one of the goals that he missed could have very well been a match winner. 11 score involvements and laid 6 tackles. I thought this was probably the best game he's had all year by a country mile. 2 votes this week. I went with Jack Viney, who I think this season has had an incredibly underrated season. We always talk about, Clayton Oliver, Christian Petrarca, Max Gawn. But this year, Jack Viney, he's had somewhat of a year. 26 disposals. What let him down is he only ran at 38% disposal efficiency. That is absolutely disgusting. But he had 9 clearances. He had 2 goal assists. He had 10 score involvements and he laid 8 tackles. And the tackles he was laying, especially late in the game, were game-defining tackles in the fact that he was stopping critical moments of play. And I think he had to be rewarded for that. My best on ground this week, again, another player who I feel hasn't been within all Australian discussions, but I feel very well should be, and that's Josh Dunkley. 32 disposals at 62%, 14 of those were contested, 434 metres gained, 7 clearances, 12 marks, only scored the 1 behind on the game, but he had 1 goal assist, 10 score involvements, and laid a game-high 10 tackles. Saturday afternoon started off at Marvel Stadium with North Melbourne hosting the Bulldogs in a game that I did say when it came to tipping this particular round, I thought North Melbourne could give this a red-hot crack. I ended up tipping the Bulldogs, and thankfully so, but this was a game, yet again, that probably should have been done at halftime, if not three-quarter time, given the margin. It was a game that saw North Melbourne only trail the Bulldogs by 9 points at quarter time, and you thought, well, given the way that North Melbourne have been playing over the last month, they're going to give this game a red-hot crack. The Bulldogs then started to skip away with it and were almost 20-odd points up at halftime, 19 points. And even though they had that kind of break in play, you knew North Melbourne were going to come, because we've seen it happen over the last month. North Melbourne have been piecing together some really solid football, especially in the second half. But then at three-quarter time, you're staring down the barrel of a 31-point margin and you start to question whether or not North Melbourne have it in them to bring this game back. And they only fell to 17 points. I thought they did incredibly well to stay this close, especially given some of the wins that we have seen the Bulldogs have this year and the margins they've been able to blow some teams away. You probably would have been a miss to think that the Bulldogs were going to come into this game and win by 10 plus goals. But North Melbourne hung in, and to their credit, I pay credit where credit's due. They put on a very solid performance, especially on the back end. I mean, the Bulldogs did have opportunities that they kind of squandered a little bit that could have set them up for a much bigger win. But I think looking at this game, I would argue that North Melbourne take more out of this than what the Bulldogs do. North Melbourne are starting to really string some good football together that kind of gives hope to the shin boners to really show them that they have something there. Something's ready to click. It just hasn't clicked yet. Looking at the stat line, it was an even spread. There were players from both teams that really stood tall. And while some players always in that kind of conversation for both of these teams, there were a couple of names that popped up that really, really surprised me. And it goes to show that, I was just speaking about the disparity between Brisbane and Melbourne, and there was only a handful of Melbourne players that stood up, whereas there was a list of Brisbane players. In this game, we had equal opportunity for both teams, and it was a good mix of players that sometimes we don't talk about all that much. Like Darcy Tucker from North Melbourne, best game I've seen him play as a Kangaroo, arguably the best game I've seen him play in recent years. 30 disposals at 83%. He might have only had the 5 contested, but he had 375 metres gained, had the 1 clearance, 7 marks, 3 score involvements, laid 5 tackles. I thought he was great on the day. Bailey Williams is sometimes, I feel, a forgotten Bulldog. 25 disposals at 92%, 10 marks, 3 score involvements, so he was huge out of that defensive line. Then you have players like Tom Powell, Bailey Scott, Riley Sanders, Joel Frazier, the young kid for the Bulldogs, having a decent outing. Charlie Comben having a good outing. Eddie Ford. The shock for me was Luke Davies-Uniacke, only having 17 disposals. He ran at 82% efficiency, had 6 clearances, but he only plucked 2 marks for the game, laid 6 tackles, but only had the 3 score involvements and didn't hit the scoreboard, which is something we are used to seeing from him. Riley Sanders having 21 disposals, a few clearances, laying a couple of tackles, probably showing that he should be getting more opportunity. But again, if we start talking about Luke Beveridge as a coach, I'm going to fall down the fucking rabbit hole, and we are going to be here for an incredibly long time. So I'm just going to jump straight in with the 3-2-1 MVP votes this particular week. For the 1 vote, I struggled. I really seesawed here. I considered Darcy Tucker for the 1 vote. I considered Bailey Dale, Adam Treloar, Bailey Scott, but I landed on Tom Liberatore, who I feel does get spoken about, but I feel in some circles doesn't get spoken about enough. And when you've got players like Marcus Bontempelli, Jack McRae, especially over recent years, you'd probably be forgiven to kind of forget about Liberatore, but I think his work rate is so incredibly underrated. 25 disposals at 64%. 9 of those 25 were contested. He had 240 meters gained, 4 clearances, 5 marks, 1 goal, 2 goal assists, 5 score involvements, and had 4 tackles on the day. The 2 vote, I'm gearing to have you. The 2 votes this week is going to Harry Sheezel. Again, just having a stellar season in my eyes. Might be winning the 2 vote this week was hard to look past Harry Sheezel. I thought on the day he was probably best on for North Melbourne. 27 disposals at 81% disposal efficiency. 12 of those 27 were contested. 338 meters gained. Had 5 clearances, 5 marks, 1 goal, 1 goal assist, 6 score involvements, but only laid the 1 tackle, which is very odd to see, but playing a really good role in that midfield, and I love that he's getting that midfield time to further grow his skill set. And best on was hard to look past Marcus Bontempelli. 35 disposals, only at 68% disposal efficiency, but he's never really been the most effective with his disposals. 20 of those 35 were contested, 647 meters gained, 11 clearances, 6 marks, had opportunity to hit the scoreboard, only kicked 3 behinds, but he had 6 score involvements and he laid 4 tackles. Sydney versus Fremantle at the SCG proved to be one of the games of the round and was a game that left me absolutely gobsmacked from the word go. To think Fremantle would rock up at a ground like the SCG against a team that has only fumbled 1 game in the first 16, 17 rounds, depending on how you want to gauge, round 0, and to lead the game 7 goals 2 to 2 goals 5 at quarter time, 17-44. I was thinking, what the fuck is going on here? Now, we probably expected Sydney to get themselves into a position around this time of the season, not having lost a game in so long, only having the 1 loss on the year. I've always been a firm believer of if you're going to lose a game, you're better off losing it at this point of the season than come the back end, especially when finals are involved. But this just continues to show that seesaw effect of Fremantle's year. They come out 1 game, get absolutely obliterated. They come out the next, and they turn up playing like a top 4 team. I don't understand where this inconsistency stems from, but again, they continue a good run. They lead by a few goals at half-time, but Sydney is starting to come back into the sway of things. You start feeling that momentum at some point is going to shift. At 3/4 time, they get it back to a 12-point margin, and you just know that the last quarter is going to be an absolute banger. And it came down to a kick after the siren. Logan McDonald, the heir apparent that everybody has been talking about to take over the Lance Franklin model, has a mark outside 50. The mark's probably thereabouts on the 50-meter line. Siren goes. A behind will tie the game. A goal will win the game. And he absolutely shanks the fuck out of the ball, and in the end it doesn't even make the distance. I, as a neutral supporter, was torn between being so kind of shocked by the standard of football we saw from Fremantle in this game, to the state of shock I was in that Sydney brought it back. Well, probably not as much of a shock. We probably knew that Sydney would come back as they did, but I felt so heartbroken as a neutral supporter seeing Logan McDonald after that game. Everything on the line, at the very least, you'd probably think, let's go for the point, let's go for the draw. But to miss it all completely, I don't know how he would feel, and it just broke me as a neutral supporter to see him just kind of slumped on the ground, head in his hands, everyone trying to get around him. It was a huge moment, and Fremantle, deservingly so, walk away with a 1-point victory and delivered Sydney their only second loss for the season. It was an upset of upsets. It really was. But Fremantle winning this game, it now puts them in the top 4. And you start kind of thinking back about the conversation points I've been having in these podcasts. I've been saying that I feel Fremantle is going to be the dark horse of the finals this year. I feel their best is competitive enough to defeat anybody in the competition. The difference being their best sometimes gets left behind and they fail to kind of, deliver that consistently. They win this game. They could very well go home this coming week against Richmond and lose to Richmond. This is how Fremantle's season has kind of continued to roll on. But Sydney, again, 2 games rather, clear. Sydney, however, they're still 2 games clear on top of the ladder. And we know, as I just said, there are going to be some games that teams are going to fumble. You're better off doing it now. They've still got that break. They still are the best team in the comp, in my personal opinion. Just get these losses out of the way. If it's going to happen, let it happen now. Sydney weren't without opportunity to win this game. They were very inaccurate in front of goal. I mean, registering 8 behinds up until halftime. They extend that out to 14 behinds by the end of the game. Definitely had opportunity in the first quarter as well, coming out and kicking 2 goals 5 to the more accurate 7 goals 2 that Fremantle managed to put up. Not surprisingly, given the scoreline, it was a lot of Fremantle players that were, best ranked on field comparatively to Sydney. And in saying that as well, there were some players that didn't really live up to their monikers that they've kind of set this year. Like Isaac Heaney still had a solid game. 20 disposals at 65%, 10 contested possessions, 6 clearances, didn't kick a goal on the day, but still had 7 score involvements and laid 6 tackles. To me, wasn't good enough to be in conversation for the best 3 players on ground. Errol Goulden only has 21 disposals and runs at 66%. He only hits the scoreboard with a behind, but he has 8 score involvements and 5 tackles. Rowbottom, who has been known for his tackling prowess, lays 4, but that's unders to what we're used to seeing him play. Chad Warner had a solid enough game, but still wasn't good enough to be in conversation for best 3. And these are players that we are used to in Sydney games instantly talking about. Instantly, straight away. Isaac Heaney, Errol Goulden, Chad Warner. They're always in conversation. I think if you look over every single vote that I've given out in a Sydney game this year, 2 of those 3 at least are always in that conversation. For Fremantle, however, you had so many players, including Nat Fyfe, who has had a down year. Nat Fyfe has 22 disposals at 77%. 12 of the 20 are contested. 8 clearances, 3 marks, 7 score involvements, 3 tackles. Jordan Clark off of the half-back line. 23 disposals at 91%. 7 score involvements, 6 marks. Corey Wagner, I was going to say Warner, but I meant Wagner. 21 disposals at 71%. He has 10 marks on the game. Matthew Johnson, another youngster, 21 disposals at 76%. He has 4 in score involvements, 4 tackles. He has 6 clearances. It's just Jeremy Sharp on the outside, 25 disposals, 1 clearance, 8 marks, 4 score involvements, 2 tackles. It was just incredible to see such a even mix of Fremantle stand tall against what has arguably been the best midfield in the competition. The 3 players that I did pluck out for the votes this week were probably easily the best 3 on ground. However, the honourable mention I've got to throw out there is to Luke Ryan from the defensive 50 of Fremantle. 26 disposals at 88%, 8 marks, 3 score involvements, but only the 1 tackle. Not really showing the defensive pressure that we're used to seeing out of him, but still had a very good game and could argue was well and truly in that mix of best on. But the 1 vote this week I am giving to Andrew Brayshaw. 24 disposals at 66%, 9 contested, 414 metres gained, 5 clearances, 4 marks, 9 score involvements, and 3 tackles. The 2 vote this week goes to his partner in crime in Caleb Sarong. 23 disposals, only at 60% efficiency however, 12 contested, 282 metres gained, 8 clearances, 2 marks, 1 goal, 9 score involvements, and 7 tackles. And best on ground for me, and probably well within All-Australian discussion for that defensive 50, is Nick Blakey. Again, a player that I really appreciate. If Richmond was ever in a position to be able to pluck this guy out of Sydney, I would be all fucking over it, because for his size, he is so athletic, he is great with the ball. He reminds me very much of Noah Bolter in the way that they're both really quickly paced, they're both tall, they can take great overhead marks, they're good users of the footy. But he had 32 disposals at 78%, 8 of those were contested, 755 metres gained, 1 clearance, 10 marks, 1 goal, 1 goal assist, 7 score involvements, but surprisingly for a guy that's prided himself on his defensive efforts, 0 tackles on the day. The Gold Coast hosted Collingwood at People's First Stadium, and this is going to bring about a discussion point that I'm going to put to you guys in the comments down below, because I think it's one that definitely needs to be had. Gold Coast went into this game undefeated at this ground, and they leave this ground yet again undefeated. Now, if the AFL are wanting to branch out and be a national team, and we know that, certain locations like Darwin, etc., do not have these teams yet in the competition, for the Gold Coast to be going to these locations, especially People's First, and be as dominant a team as we have seen at a specific location, especially over the course of this year, surely there should be some conversations about People's First being a fixture head for Gold Coast, and maybe shifting them to People's First and making them play out of that area permanently. Could you imagine? They could become a fucking powerhouse if they moved out there, given how well adjusted they have become to playing at that particular ground. It scares me to think of the possibilities. I don't think it'll ever happen, but to think that we've got a state like Queensland, which is a rugby state, just like New South Wales, that struggles a bit to kind of push the AFL agenda outside of the Brisbane Lions. And Gold Coast, we've never seen them have, record numbers in any way, shape or form. If you shifted it to People's First and you kind of made Gold Coast that orientated type of team, I reckon it could be big for them moving forward. It's never going to happen, but that's just my personal take. And this was a game that, saw a really good arm wrestle up until quarter time. There was only a point the difference. Then at halftime, it was 20 points, but you knew Collingwood were going to come back in some way, shape or form. But then the Gold Coast come out in that third term and put pedal to the metal, and you start to think this is where the game is going to be lost for the Collingwood Magpies. They're just going to let it slip. And it was wrestled back again and again and again, and Collingwood kept firing. 2 Goal of the Year nominations out of this game at specific moments in the last quarter as well. Very crucial moments. Jordan De Goey slots a beautiful goal from the boundary line. Nick Dacos has an effort that sets him up for one of the best goals that I've seen kicked this year. And it wasn't enough, because they had this rally of goals, but then the Gold Coast would find a way to get the ball forward and snag 1 or 2 and just keep that gap. In the end, 11 points the way of the Gold Coast, and all the conversation is now starting to come around the fact that Collingwood's defensive structure is not the same as what we're used to seeing. They've apparently become the second worst team in the comp defensively in some retrospects. And I don't understand how that can be a thing, because I still rate them incredibly highly. But there are players that have dropped off. We have seen Darcy Moore drop off in his efforts. We have seen Isaac Quaynor not have as much impact as he used to have. So I'm going to present the idea that I posed to my best mate, who's an avid Collingwood supporter. I feel this whole defensive structure has kind of gone to shit since Nathan Murphy's retirement. And I say that because Nathan Murphy's ability to be a one-on-one defender allowed Darcy Moore to be that more intercept kind of role, to take those easy grabs over the top, and vice versa. When Darcy Moore was that lockdown defender, it allowed Nathan Murphy to be that intercept float-through defender. Now that Nathan Murphy's gone, Darcy Moore is trapped between playing one or the other. He either plays one-on-one and they don't have that intercept marker down there, or if he does go for the intercept, which isn't his strongest suit, that one-on-one defensive structure loses out, and then you get somebody slipping out the end of the ball, getting an easy ball out, and it's game over. I think that's where that disparity has kind of come from. But again, Gold Coast just putting an absolute performance on at People's First. They'd probably want to play more games there each and every year moving forward, because it's these wins at People's First that has still got them in contention for finals this year. The only negative slant you can probably take out of this game as a Collingwood player, apart from the loss, is that Beau McCreary has gone down with an injury that's going to sideline him for 6 to 8 weeks. And with the injury list they've already got, kind of forces them now to continue to turn to young kids. And is it going to kind of impact them a bit moving forward? Because we've seen them have to rely on bringing in so many players this year. The difference between Collingwood and Richmond is Collingwood has still found a way to stay relevant while doing so. They had a lot of players come back in this week, which I think held them in good stead. Brody Myercheck came back in. DeGoey came back in. It was good to see these players coming back in for Collingwood. And this was a game where, as a neutral, I found myself wanting to see Collingwood get up in this game. Just something, knowing coming to this ground, and the Gold Coast have been undefeated here. They came in backs against the wall, and I love an underdog story. And when they kind of started that rally late in the game, I thought, here we go, we're in for a hot finish. We got that hot finish. It just fell the way of a team that, unfortunately, I wasn't trying to rally behind. As far as the best performers on the day go, you could have raffled a fair few players, at least for the one vote. Players that missed out that we could have had in discussion. Tuke Miller had 31 disposals at 74%, 10 contested, 451 metres gained, 5 tackles, 9 score involvements, and 3 clearances. Ben Ainsworth has 2 goals on the day with 8 score involvements, 28 disposals at 71%, 505 metres gained. Will Graham got the NAB Rising Star nomination for this round with a 22 disposal performance, 10 contested, 77% disposal efficiency, 4 clearances, 3 marks, 1 goal, 7 score involvements, and the 3 tackles. Sexton had 20 disposals and 4 marks off of halfback. Rail had 20 disposals and 3 clearances. Only 10 of his 20 were contested, only 4 tackles as well, so a little bit down by him. Jordan DeGoey, first game back in a very long time, 21 disposals at 76%, 5 clearances, 2 goals, 11 score involvements, 4 tackles. Patrick Lipinski had a good game, 21 disposals at 85%, 7 score involvements, 3 tackles from him. But I feel the 3 we landed on were probably the 3 that'll come close to getting Brownlow votes as well. The 1 vote for me goes to Sam Flanders, who I feel had a more influential first half than he did second half, but he had 33 disposals at 69% efficiency, 15 of those were contested, 357 metres gained, 6 clearances, 3 marks, 1 goal, 1 goal assist, 8 score involvements, and 3 tackles. The 2 vote goes to Nick Dacos, who I just turned around and said has kicked one of the best goals I've seen all year. 32 disposals at 65%, 11 contested, 691 metres gained, 5 clearances, 4 marks, 2 goals, 2 goal assists, 9 score involvements, and 3 tackles. And best on ground was Noah Anderson, who was my smoky at the start of the year to potentially pull on his first All-Australian blazer. And I think he is definitely still well within the conversation. He's had a really good year for the Gold Coast. 39 disposals at 76%. 13 of those 39, however, were contested. So he had a fair few that were uncontested loose balls. 412 metres gained, 6 clearances, 8 marks, 8 score involvements, and 5 tackles. Adelaide versus GWS at Adelaide Oval. Talk about a fucking upset. And probably not an upset in the retrospect of, you know, it was being played in Adelaide, so Adelaide should have been favourite. But when having a look at the way both of these teams have been performing this year overall, GWS definitely came into this game as the better team and got absolutely towed up around the contest. And I struggle to try to find an answer for where the fuck this drop-off has come from GWS. They have come from what I thought was going to be a top 4 lock for the first, I don't know how many games of this year, and now are at genuine risk of missing the top 8 completely. I do not understand what is going on, because they have, on paper, arguably a top 4 list, quite comfortably. They have players playing football that quantifies them being a top 4 list. What the fuck is going on? Then you've got Adelaide, who many thought this year would be a top 4, top 5, top 6 team that has failed to deliver miserably, but comes out and plays football like they did on this past weekend. And it makes you wonder, where the fuck has this football been? This game was a real what the fuck is going on type of game, especially as a neutral supporter. At quarter time, it was a red hot contest, 18-24, both teams coming hard at it from the gates. And then at half time, you're looking at a 33-point margin to Adelaide, 63-30, and you're wondering, okay, what the fuck? Where's this been from Adelaide all year? Then at 3/4 time, Adelaide struggled to score. They managed to take their score from 63-74, 11 points for the quarter versus the 21 that GWS put on. And you start to think, yep, here it is. This is the Adelaide we have come to know and you know, appreciate. This is where the slip's going to come. And they managed to kick the 20-odd points for the rest of the game versus GWS putting on 27 points of their own. But they managed to stem that flow. The last quarter, they were able to really settle things down and get it on their own terms, even though GWS were coming at them hard. And it was just both frustrating and exhilarating to watch both of these teams perform. Exhilarating for Adelaide because Adelaide have this capability to play good football, and it's great to see them do so, but frustrating because you expect so much more from GWS, and yet again, this slide continues to happen. And I seriously, I don't know. Do you guys know where this fucking slides come from? I really don't. I don't know whether the loss of Sam Taylor is going to be critical to them missing finals this year, because he is absolutely monumental to their structure. But they've been sliding down the ladder and losing these games even with Sam Taylor in the team before his very fucking unfortunate injury. For those of you that aren't aware, ruptured testicle. Let's not even talk about it, because my testicles are fucking shivering just thinking about it. But this game, what? This was a game that had an even spread of contributors for both teams, and when it came to picking out who to give votes to, there are going to be players that performed really well that are going to miss, and there are a couple of votes that have gone out for this game that people might be a little bit shocked with, especially the 3 vote. But I looked at not just statistics when it came to this, but how those statistics kind of measured to what I felt were impactful on the day and the moments that these players had. Tom Green had 38 disposals at 73%, 5 clearances, 5 tackles, and did not get a vote this week. We had Lockie Ash, 26 disposals at 80%, took 6 marks, had 2 tackles, doesn't get a vote. We had Callan Ward, 24 disposals at 87%, 9 marks, 2 goals, 5 score involvements, no vote. No vote for Josh Kelly, who might have potentially maybe injured himself this week. So keep an eye out for that if you're a GWS fan. Rory Laird had a down game, 23 disposals. Jordan Dawson down with 24 disposals as well. Both had influences on different ends of the spectrum, with Dawson having 10 marks for the game. Rory Laird had 7 score involvements. Not enough to get a vote this week. The players that did, feel free to argue this with me because I'm sure it's going to cause some genuine discussion points. The 1 vote goes to Isaac Rankin. 27 disposals at 59%, 14 contested, 591 metres gained. He had 6 clearances, 7 marks, 2 goals, 3, 1 goal assist, 9 score involvements, and 2 tackles on the day. I thought his impact, especially in front of goal in a game that came down to moments and to a game that fell within a few kicks, he was monumental when it came to winning his individual ball. The 2 votes goes to Lachie Whitfield, who was easily best on ground for GWS in a season that yet again I feel is a career-defining best on season for him. 41 disposals at 80% disposal efficiency. 5 of those disposals, however, were contested, so he ran around getting a lot of uncontested football. 564 metres gained, 1 clearance, 12 marks, 3 score involvements, and 4 tackles. But best on ground for me, in a player who I feel has had a breakout season for Adelaide and would be probably within conversation as being marked as their biggest improver this year, is defender Mitchell Hinge. 31 disposals at 77% disposal efficiency, 7 contested, 622 metres gained, 1 clearance, 8 marks, 5 score involvements, and 3 tackles. I just feel for a player that plays a key defensive role like Hinge, has been getting himself involved a lot more forward of the ball this year, and has been incredibly deadly when using his football prowess around the ground. You could probably argue Lachie Whitfield was best on overall, but I feel the moments that Mitch Hinge had set up pivotal moments within the game. And I'm going to get dragged for probably giving him the 3, but I think he was best on. That's just my personal take. Now, Saturday night rounded out with a game that is going to get people talking, and it has been for the duration of up until this point in time, really. Geelong hosting Essendon at the MCG. In a game that Geelong really needed to win to get their season back on track, and a game that Essendon really needed to win to prove that they can defeat the contending teams, because of the top, I think, 10 teams, top 11 teams, Essendon have beaten 1 and they drew with another. And a lot of people, including myself, still are yet to be proven that Essendon are a good team until they defeat those teams that are within contention. It's easy to get easy wins against West Coast, Richmond, North Melbourne, Hawthorn, St Kilda, all teams that have been underperforming this year. West Coast have been performing well, but still underperforming in relation to the rest of the competition. And I'm still yet to be convinced with Essendon. However, this game, I feel, wasn't without a shift in umpiring that is incredibly questionable. I agree with one of the decisions made, but the disparity between how both of these teams were adjudicated in the third quarter especially is too glaring to not talk about. At quarter time, Essendon led this game by a single goal. We knew we were in for a good game moving forward, just how the flow of the game was going up until that point in time. At halftime, Essendon led by 5 points, and it was a game up until that halftime moment that was a real arm wrestle. It was almost goal for goal. Everybody was going in hard. It was a great game of football to watch. And then the third quarter went down, and we started seeing incredibly one-sided adjudication. Now, the decision I do agree with. There was a rushed, deliberate behind call that gave Oliver Dempsey one of his goals on the night, dead in front. I can't remember which player it was that had the ball deep. It may have been Kelly for Essendon, I want to say, maybe, but essentially took possession of the ball in the goal square. Oliver Dempsey kind of knew what was going to happen. He was going to try to rush the ball, so Oliver Dempsey tried to put as little amount of pressure on as possible so that call would be made. Essendon player takes the ball over the line, a free kick for delivery is paid. Now, in my eyes, if you watch that in isolation, he had ample opportunity to get rid of the ball and decided to take the ball over the line. I refer this back to the round 0 free kick that was paid against Nathan Broad. Nathan Broad had a similar amount of time of opportunity to get rid of the football, chose not to, took the ball over the line, free kick was paid. You have a look at those two instances, almost exactly the same. I don't know why people are arguing that it was okay to go against Broad, but it's not okay to go against Essendon. In this case, I feel the umpire got it right. It was the inconsistencies of the rest of the adjudication of the quarter that I do not have any respect for. Forward half for Geelong, Jordan Ridley takes possession, instantly tackled, one arm pinned, don't know how he's supposed to get rid of it, 360'd into a tackle, umpire runs in, holding the ball, free kick. I'm not sure whether Geelong scored a goal off of that, but still, it's the principle of the fact. Essendon then get up the ball up their end. Tom Stewart gets caught holding the ball. Jack Bowes gets caught holding the ball. I think Mitch Duncan at one point gets caught holding the ball. In all instances, play on, play on, play on. The ball's kicked to Sam Draper, deep in the forward line. Zach Tui comes in, chopping of the arms, front on contact. Take your pick. Nope, play on. I just hate that a great game of football had a shift in umpiring in the third quarter that killed momentum for one team and gave momentum to another. I'm not saying this cost Essendon the game, because Essendon had moments that they kind of could have gotten back into the contest, and you could probably argue, okay, maybe the umpiring being one-sided did set Geelong up for the win, but Geelong did go on in that last quarter to go from 72 to 105, and in retrospect, Essendon were only able to kick 9 points from three-quarter time to full-time. So you could argue that it was the momentum shift. Geelong were on a high. Essendon were disgruntled and fucking broken. This is where comments from Andrew Dillon saying that the umpiring has been the best or as good as it's been for a very long time fucking pisses me off, because you cannot say the umpiring is good when we have a monumental shift that gets enough momentum for a team to win and kills momentum for another to a point where they struggle to fucking score for a quarter of football. We're going to bench this conversation because I feel I'm going to rant on about it. And if you've been following this podcast, you know that umpiring and everything is something that has been a heavy topic of the podcast, and I'm trying to step away from that as best as I can, but it's hard to do so when shit like this happens. Turning our attention to the three players I've selected for best on ground, because I don't want to dwell on this any longer than I should. There were a fair few that we probably could have raffled for a couple. I think when it come to best on, that was probably my hardest one. I couldn't justify giving best on ground to an Essendon player in a 45-point losing team, because I think ideally that's not even going to happen in the Brownlow. So I tried to kind of stay true to that. If I wanted to break that rule, I probably would have given best on ground to an Essendon player in this game. Again, there were a few players that were thereabout that could have been mentioned. I mean, Max Holmes has 23 disposals at 69%, takes 6 marks, 4 tackles. Dangerfield has 22, 12 contested, 5 marks for the game, 6 score involvement, 6 tackles. Tom Stewart, no, we won't talk about Tom Stewart because he actually might be in vote calculation. Zach Merritt, 23 disposals, 30. I found it hard to give best on ground to a player in an Essendon jumper, only because 45-point loss, I don't think you could justify giving somebody in a losing team best on. I don't know. That's just my opinion, and we know that's how the Brownlow normally works as well. So that's not going to happen this week. So the 2 vote The person who gets 2 votes in this game, I thought was probably best on, but in a losing team, I couldn't justify it. There were some players that had great performances that missed out. Nick Martin for Essendon, 27 disposals at 63%, but very little impact outside of that. He only had 1 clearance, 2 marks, 2 score involvements, 1 tackle. Didn't think he was good enough. Jack Bowes for Geelong had 26 disposals at 57%, 6 marks, 7 tackles. Max Holmes had 23 at 69%, 6 marks, 4 score involvements, 4 tackles as well. Heppel in his milestone game, 22 disposals at 77%, 5 marks, 2 tackles. Dangerfield had an okay game. Sam de Koning had a good game. But these 3, I think, are probably going to be in the mix. I would probably argue for Brownlow votes. I definitely feel these 3, when we look at it in isolation, had some really good moments for their teams. The 1 vote I'm giving to Tom Stewart. Defensively sound, did a really good job for Geelong, especially with players like Stringer and Peter Wright getting a lot of the ball early. 23 disposals at 69%, 9 of those were contested, 384 metres gained, 4 clearances, 8 marks, 6 score involvements, and 5 tackles. The 2 vote, and my vote for probably, he could maybe get 3 votes here for Brownlow. I don't know how they're going to do it, but I gave it to Jai Caldwell. 32 disposals at 59%, 18 of the 32 were contested, 12 clearances, 4 marks, 1 goal assist, 3 score involvements, and 12 tackles. And best on ground, some of you might not agree, but I gave it to Oliver Dempsey. 25 disposals at 60%, 5 contested, 412 metres gained, 4 marks, 2 goals, 2 goal assists, 7 score involvements, and 4 tackles. I definitely feel Oliver Dempsey was probably best on for Geelong. Was he best on overall? I don't know, but I found it hard to justify Jai Caldwell being best on in a 45-point defeat. Let me know if you agree in the comments down below. Let's talk about it. St Kilda versus Port Adelaide. Holy fuck, did I want to just rip my eyes out, because it was a game that in so many parts was so fucking scrappy and disgusting to watch. It's not funny. To think it was a 4-point game at quarter time, both teams coming out, looked like it was going to be a good fight. At halftime, it's a draw. Both teams up to the challenge. And I still struggled. I can't believe I'm going to say this. For the quarter, at 3-quarter time, a collective 2 goals. I want to make sure I'm getting it right here. Yeah. 2 goals, 9 was kicked collectively for the quarter. I was ripping my hair out, wanting to rip my eyes out. It was, I don't know what the fuck was going on. And then for the rest of the game, the following quarter, the final quarter, which saw Port Adelaide win by 2 points, mind you, St Kilda went on to kick 2 goals, 2 for the quarter, and Port Adelaide went on to kick 3 behinds, and that was still enough for them to win the game. Holy fuck. What? Don't get me wrong. It was a close finish. There were moments at the end that could have fallen the way of St Kilda, but holy fuck, to watch such a scrappy, inaccurate game of football, especially from a team like St Kilda, who this year have been touted as one of the worst forward structures, you know, one of the worst teams for generating points, and they can't kick winning scores. To see in a half of football, St Kilda went on to kick 2 goals, 6 after half time. In respect to that, Port Adelaide went on to kick 2 goals, 8. That's fucked. That is so fucked. I am so sorry. We need to get out of this game before we fucking get too fucking infested. Let's move shit on as quick as we can. That's all I can say. Ken Hinkley did provide a very emotionally driven post-game press conference on the field, even tears in his eyes as well. So it shows that this win meant a lot, especially with Port Adelaide's back up against the wall, but I still wouldn't be proud of the efforts, because this was a deplorable game to watch. West Coast got belted by 10 goals, and yet in parts I found that game easier to watch than I did this game. The 3-2-1 for me here was very easy to pluck out, and I don't think you could argue these three players. You could probably maybe argue their positions in the 3-2-1, but the one vote this week I gave to Rowan Marshall. 18 disposals at 61%, 8 of those were contested, 376 metres gained, 10 hitouts, 4 clearances, 9 marks, 3 goals, 2, 7 score involvements, and 2 tackles. The 2 vote and St Kilda's best on ground I gave to Jack Sinclair. 31 disposals at 83%, 8 of those were contested at 556 metres gained, 1 clearance, 10 tackles, 7 score involvements, and 5 tackles. Did I say 10 tackles instead of 10 marks? I meant 10 marks if I said 10 tackles. I'm so flustered. I'm sorry. The best on ground, though, and he was above and beyond best on here. Just, he took his moment so incredibly well. His movement with the football was absolutely silky smooth, and that was Jason Horne-Francis. 28 disposals at 75% disposal efficiency. 8 of those were contested at 472 metres gained, 4 clearances, 6 marks, 1 goal, 1, 2 goal assists, 9 score involvements, and 2 tackles. Thank fuck, let's move on. Actually, now that I think about it, Sunday's games all probably are games that we can quickly move through, which is a heartbreaking kind of point for me, because the next game was at the MCG with Richmond taking on Carlton. Now, as a Richmond man, I knew Carlton was going to win this game, and I knew they were going to win it quite convincingly comparatively to our round 1 game against them. Richmond this year just haven't had a year that has fallen right for them. Injuries have hit us every fucking week. A new coach, new system, players underperforming. I can make as many excuses as I want, but Richmond's year has been one that I would rather forget. And this was a game that had a little bit of bright light, because we debuted Jacob Blight, our mid-season pick, our first of 2, and he was very Alex Rance-like in the way he handled himself on the field. He had one of the best defensive efforts I've seen from a Richmond player all year, with a huge spoil. Was played on Harry Mackay, one of the best defenders in the forwards rather in the comp, and kept him to 2 goals. One of those goals was kicked when Blight wasn't his direct opponent. So I thought he did incredibly well in a first game effort to play as well as he did. Ben Miller, another young defender for us, plays on Charlie Curnow. Curnow kicks 2 goals for the game, one of which was in junk time. The other one was when he was able to get away from Miller, and again, Miller wasn't his direct opponent at that particular point in time. So to keep 2 players to a collective 4 goals in an effort where only the week prior, Curnow kicked 5, playing on Geelong's defensive line, which has Tom Stewart, a 5-time All-Australian defender. So I thought Ben Miller and Jacob Blight for Richmond were absolutely huge, despite the fact that we lost by 10 goals in the end. At quarter time, Richmond were in it, 13-16. At half time, we were only 12 points down, and I thought we could give this a red-hot crack. But the story of the tape has been for Richmond for many months now. First half, they play a good brand. In the second half, the lack of engine room, lack of stamina, lack of exposure to the game with some of the younger players, that lack of fitness kicks in and the game just drops off. And we ended up kicking 4 goals, 8 for the rest of the game, versus Carlton coming out and kicking 13 goals, 3. It was very hard to watch. I still watched until the final siren, as I do every Richmond game, regardless of whether we're getting smacked or we're putting in a good effort. The only thing really to take out of this game was the fact that there was an MRO decision that cited Jordan Boyd from Carlton, the Carlton defender, with a head-high hit on Ryan Mansell. Now, I still am of the strong belief, and social media, again, people have dragged me for it, but Mansell ducked into it, so obviously he's added to that, so I'm happy to have it thrown out. I still argue it would have been a front-on contact free kick anyway, because he was still going to get hit front-on, maybe hit head-high, had Mansell not have ducked, but in instances where players duck, if he wasn't hit in the head and he was tackled, umpires need to start paying that holding the ball and start paying that as their intent, because their intent then is to try to draw the free kick instead of getting rid of the ball, pay it against them. In this instance though, Boyd had the arm tucked, he went in for the hit, so if it does hit him, regardless of whether he's ducked into it or not, the umpire has to pay it some way, shape or form. I don't think you could pay a free kick against for ducking the head into a hip and shoulder, even especially if that hip and shoulder ends up injuring a player, but we won't dive into that. Due diligence did its course, common sense prevailed, Boyd gets off, and Carlton another emphatic win 2 weeks in a row. Geelong and Richmond, they've gone absolutely ham, and going off of recent form, you could argue probably over the last month have been the better team in the comp, and probably at this point in time it's hard to see a grand final that doesn't include Sydney and Carlton going head to head. Best on ground for me was easy to work out this week. As much as I would love to talk about the efforts of some particular players, Tim Taranto again, I didn't realise had as big of a game for Richmond as he did. He had 27 disposals at 63%. The disposal efficiency doesn't shock me at all. 12 of the 27 were contested, 9 clearances, 2 marks, 1 goal, 2 score involvements and 2 tackles. I thought he had a good game for us. Blake Acres played very well for Carlton, as we have come to expect. 33 disposals at 60%, 9 of those contested, 557 metres gained, 2 clearances, 3 marks, 8 score involvements and the 2 tackles. Jacob Hopper found a bit of form, 25 disposals, 76% disposal efficiency, 9 contested, 394 metres gained, 4 clearances, 7 marks, 4 score involvements, 5 tackles. Both of these guys, when fit, have the potential to be Richmond's best, and I feel too many people give these guys too harsh of a fucking run. I know they're very similar players. I know both of them don't possess the leg speed, and we need to start using midfielders that have leg speed. That's why I would love to see Daniel Rioli shifted into a midfield role. That's why Shea Bolton should be getting more of a run. I still argue, and after this game, I turned around and did say I was happy to pay pack Shea Bolton's bags and fucking send him to Fremantle myself if Fremantle offer us a first round pick, because to see moments in this game where there was a mark taken in front of Shea Bolton by, I think it was Tyler Sonzi. Shea Bolton stood there with his arms up in the air as if to say, why'd you mark that in front of me? That was my ball. There were other instances where Shea Bolton didn't have the ball kicked to him and he was almost cracking the shits. He is such a selfish player. If he was selfless and having a down game, I wouldn't be so bullish. But he is very me-centered instead of team-orientated, and I would rather get a first-round pick and invest it elsewhere than have him to continue to stay at Richmond and put that shit on. Let's not forget, this is the same player who showboated in front of Sam Doherty when we won against Carlton by showing him the footy before kicking the goal. Yeah, I think the whole Carlton team since then have been showing Shea Bolton the fucking ball. Outside of that, there wasn't many really that stood tall for Richmond. I thought Daniel Rioli had a really good game as well. McIntosh and Vlosten did their thing. Toby Nankervis was pivotal in the ruck. But apart from that, tail as the tape was all the way of Carlton. And I'm stumbling over my words still because I'm just so frustrated with just don't get me started. Let's just try to get through the rest of this video in one piece and without me collectively losing my fucking mind. For me, I gave the one vote this week to Nick Newman. 28 disposals at 75%, 4 contested, 706 metres gained, 14 marks, 1 behind, 2 goal assists, 10 score involvements and 5 tackles. Sam Walsh was second best on for me. We'll get probably 2 Brownlow votes as well. 26 disposals at 84%, 9 were contested, 343 metres gained, 5 clearances, 5 marks, 2 goals rather, 1 goal assist, 11 score involvements and 10 tackles. And best on ground, somebody who hasn't been getting much respect from me this year as he should have, and he's probably going to make a late charge for the Brownlow as well, as much as it pains me to say it. Patrick Cripps, 40 disposals, 80% disposal efficiency, 17 contested, 468 metres gained, 2 hitouts, 14 clearances, 5 marks, 1 goal, 3 goal assists, 8 score involvements, and 4 tackles. As comprehensive of the game as you were ever going to see him play. Another game where he has notched up 40 disposals, and another game that goes to push the agenda that maybe he can win himself a second Brownlow. And the final game of the round, West Coast versus Hawthorn. I don't think we can say much about this game. West Coast kicked a score that Hawthorn were able to surpass by halftime. It was hard to watch. This was a game where I backed West Coast. I thought being at home with some of the form that they have had this year, they could give it a red hot shake. Hawthorn continuing one of the most dominant runs we have seen them have in years. And again, this is a team that I laughed off some speculation at the start of the year with people saying that Hawthorn were going to push for the top 8 this year. I thought you motherfuckers were crazy, and now I've got egg all over my fucking face. It has been impressive to watch this climb, and as a Richmond supporter, seeing how incredibly low Richmond have been this year compared to what Hawthorn's doing, I found myself in many retrospects this year incredibly jealous of the fact that such a young list, especially a list that is still introducing young kids into the game, is performing so well. But we can jump straight to the 3-2-1 here. That's no discredit to the game itself, but it was a whitewash. It was easy to work out my top 3. There wasn't many moments that we can really hang our hats on if we're looking at from a West Coast perspective. Harley Reid had the most contested possessions he's had in a game before. I think he had 15 contested for the day. He had 14 of 21 that were contested. I thought he was one of their best. Liam Duggan again, probably leading their best and fairest this year. Liam Duggan having a really good year this year. Probably the only West Coast player that could have slipped in for a 1 vote, but given the 61 points, I couldn't justify it. The 1 vote to me this week went to James Worpel. 28 disposals at 75%. 14 of those were contested, 347 metres gained, 11 clearances, 4 marks, 1 behind, 2 goal assists, 11 score involvements, and 4 tackles. 2 votes goes to Jai Newcomb. 33 disposals at 75%, 15 contested, 512 metres gained, 4 clearances, 3 marks, 9 score involvements, and 3 tackles. And best on ground, very well probably in All-Australian mix as well as a forward, is Dylan Moore. 29 disposals at 86%, 6 contested, 357 metres gained, 2 clearances, 12 marks, 2 goals, 3 goal assists, 11 score involvements, and 1 tackle. We can't recap a round without looking at the ladder to wrap things up, and this is how it sits after round 16. 2 games clear, we have Sydney still on top, with Carlton, Fremantle, and Essendon rounding out the top 4. The top 8 rounds out with Geelong, Collingwood, Port Adelaide, and Brisbane, but still within contention are the Bulldogs, GWS, Gold Coast, Melbourne, and Hawthorn. Have a look at this. Hawthorn in 13th position is sitting on a positive win-loss ratio at 32 points, only has them a game and a half outside of the top 4. That is fucking ridiculous. It rounds out with Adelaide in 14th and the bottom 4 with St Kilda, West Coast, Richmond, and North Melbourne. And with the round recapped, it is time to turn our attention to how the Hip and Shoulder MVP award sits after 16 rounds. And yet again, I'm going to rattle off the top 10 because there are so many players that have polled votes this year. We would be sitting here forever if I rattled off every single name. In equal 10th place on 12 votes, we have Lockie Whitfield, Noah Anderson, Jordan Dawson, Chad Warner, Max Gawn, and Jack Steele. In 9th place on equal 13 votes, we have Matt Rowell, Zach Butters, and Tom Green. In 8th place on equal 15 votes, we have Errol Goulden and Isaac Rankin. In 6th place on 16 votes equal, we have the partnership of Patrick Cripps and Sam Walsh. Again, Patrick Cripps probably not getting his due desserts from me, and I do apologise for that now that I've looked at it less objectively and more subjectively. And in 6th place, on 17 votes, we have Adam Treloar. The top 5 sits as follows. In 5th place, on 18 votes, we have Lockie Neal. In 4th place, on 20 votes, we have Marcus Bontempelli. In 3rd place, on 22 votes, we have Caleb Sarong. In equal 2nd place, on 25 votes, we have Zach Merritt and Nick Dacos, who has made a late charge. And despite not polling votes again this week, on 30 votes, we still have Isaac Heaney leading in 1st place. That is it, ladies and gentlemen. Round 16 of the 2024 AFL season has been officially recapped. Do thank you for joining me for another video. Do hope you guys enjoyed. Does take a little bit to put these together, but I do appreciate you guys coming out to show your love and support. And I do appreciate the fact that you're enjoying what I'm doing. If you are enjoying, if you want to continue to support myself, hit that like button down below to tell YouTube I'm doing something right, and get on board the community we are slowly piecing together here by hitting that subscribe button as well. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.